hosting this talk today. And of course, Rachel Gerard, whose exhibition we are sitting in within. Thank you for listening to us for this hour. So I'll give a short ramble before I give it over to my panelists for this discussion. Our focus today is on the work that remains to be done for fair representation of women in the art field. And namely, we are going to consider how women artists, gallery owners, and curators may experience and mitigate gender inequality. So quite simply, what has changed and what has improved in recent years, and what blind spots remain. I hope that this panel will be solutions focused. That's something that's quite important to all of us today, and also consider the intersectional considerations of gender. Of course, we can be quite certain that exclusion exists more rapidly when you're talking about the intersections of gender with race, religion, ability, identity, and orientation. So we're not just talking about dismantling structures of patriarchy here, but also white straight patriarchy in particular. So before we get started, I just wanted to give a short timeline to kind of contextualize things a bit more. All of these things will probably be familiar to most of us, but in 2017 there was a watershed moment, of course, for women's issues with Time's Up, Seen and Heard in India, Me Too, etc. And these were important social media movements that catalyzed critical discussions about this topic. And indeed, change was certainly catalyzed. But it was not just those movements, it was decades and centuries of struggle that we should obviously pay homage to. And we're going to talk a bit today about how things do certainly look better. Visibility, impressions are important. Certainly people are more visible in the fields than they were before. But as it's really important with this topic, it's also important to look at numbers. And I work for art, and so we talk about numbers a lot. And my boss, this extraordinary journalist, Julia Halperin, did a study in 2019 with Charlotte Burns that looked at the topic of women representation, and I think there's some good numbers that can maybe anchor our topic today. Those sales of women actually doubled in the past decade. Only 11% of all sales were of women artists. So that just shows that even though things are improving, they still represent such a small part of the market. 2% of sales represent women artists. And 11% of museum acquisitions in the past 10 years in the US have been women artists. And that number is even more bleak when you're looking at people of color, regardless of gender. That number is actually at 1% of museum acquisitions. Honing in on Berlin a little bit, the Institute for Strategy Development and the BBK did a really interesting study in 2018. And they detailed shockingly low pay for artists in general. But within that very bleak pay rate, there was a 28% gender pay gap for women. So again, visibility and impressions do not necessarily translate into any kind of equity, and we must discuss this further. And I'd be remiss not to mention also that of those surveyed, 31% female-identified surveyees also said they'd experienced sexual harassment in the professional fields of art in Berlin. So, 2021, we're in the middle to end, we hope, of a pandemic, and we don't have numbers for the past 2 years, specifically because, of course, they've been extraordinary and unlike any others, but I would be safe to say that much is more or less the same. I would guess that these numbers have changed too drastically. There hasn't been a lot of acquisitions in the past years compared to other years, etc. I will, with no further ado, introduce our panelists. I'm pleased to be joined today by Berlin art dealer Tanja Wagner, who just celebrated her 10th anniversary last year, and since I've known her, has long been talking about these issues to me. And Lydia Anastasova, head of Architect Collection of the Neue Berliner Kunstverein, whose research and practice also focuses on issues of gender, but also race, class, age, and care. And of course, remotely joining us is normally Berlin-based artist Julieta Aranda, co-founder of eFlux. So thank you so much for speaking about this today. To get started, I thought maybe you could all shortly introduce yourselves and maybe tell us a bit about what brought you to this panel in particular today.
So maybe I can start. So Good to Talk is an event, a platform that celebrates speech, event, talks, performances, and so we wanted to host this talk here in this gallery, and because I founded this gallery 10 years ago, and it was that I started off with an all-female program. It was actually triggered by a conversation I had with a colleague. I was researching for my IVAS program. She was a bit older, had more experience, but she said, "Oh, I would love to show more female artists, but there aren't really many good ones." And that was in 2009. And at that time, I was not so much focused on that issue, but I thought, that's really strange. Does that happen to me when I look for artists, and who do I want to give a platform never really, in the beginning at least, in the first 5 years, we didn't really address it as like, the feminist gallery or feminist issues. I just wanted to, also give myself time to give a platform to female artists, but also to see, okay, what are the reactions? Is it really, are we pushed into a corner or not? Is it really, because for me it was always about the issues the artists talked about, and that was also still my main topic, humanistic issues, relevant topics of our society, and kind of humans being in the center of everything throughout any kind of media, and of course also for me very important global perspectives. So to have a history or different biographies and experiences of the artist, and that's kind of how I started. And so since the last 10 years, we've been dealing and celebrating and fighting for all of these issues that we're talking about today.
Lydia, do you want to tell us a bit about your research and your work with architect?
Yeah. First of all, thanks so much for the invitation. It's an honor and pleasure and joy being here, and thanks so much for all of you being here. My name is Lydia Anastasova. Kate, thanks so much for the introduction. And as you mentioned, I work for Norberliner Kunstverein as head architect, and it's very fresh. I'm there since 1 year now. But I really love my job, I have to say, because, and especially like being part of the architect, and also starting during the pandemics and seeing that it can work and how it works also during the crisis, one of the first our generation kind of faces in this scale. So the Orthotheque, maybe just shortly to mention which kind of collection this is. It's like, it was founded in the 70s, like 1970, 1 year after Norberliner Kunstverein was founded in Berlin, and it's a contemporary art collection. Annually there are acquisitions, so the collection grows. Now at the moment we have like over 4,000 works in general, and the special moment, that's why it's called Architeca, like bibliothek or bibliotheca. I love to also to play with this word, is that Berliner residents, like people who are registered, live in Berlin, based in Berlin, are welcome to come over and borrow art, like as we borrow books in libraries. So it's really fun. It's the most open concept I know so far. Like shortly maybe to my professional background, before I came to Berlin, I used to work at Kunsthaus Bregenz in Austria, and it was like a really fantastic experience, but more like in public programming and curatorial also a bit, and so now like working for the Architect, I can see like this very open access, like the accessibility of art, and how people who come to us just love it. On one point it's just like feel free to come in and choose your art and do not have to explain why you do it. It just can be that it, and so on and so on. And that the other moment is like working with the artist and seeing how the different artists we work with or have a contact with love that moment of accessibility of their works as well.
Thank you. Julieta, I'm looking at you now. Hi. Could you introduce yourself and tell us a bit about what brings you to this panel today?
Sure. My name is Julieta Aranda. I am an artist and also a founding member of eFlux. I'm not going to explain eFlux because I'm going to take the liberty of assuming that people more or less know what it is. It's both a platform and a space for events, quite experimental. It's grown over the past 20 years in ways that we did not expect. It really fits into my practice. What I do is mostly sculpture and media. The topics that I tend to work with are science fiction, mechanisms of circulation, both of people, of ideas, and of art objects, outside of structures of traditional commerce, and political imaginaries. And I have been quite, I come from Mexico, and it has been, as you may imagine, an uphill battle the entire time to get anything done, because you get constantly stuck, it's like you feel stuck with demands that you must make work something that I call aboutness. Like my work should be about being Mexican or about being And that's this is like a kind of like adoptive experience that a lot of people from non-white backgrounds tend to experience. It's like a demand that you must satisfy this kind of curiosity gains, I guess. So through its construction, we can address the idea of different mechanisms. And I think there have been two experiences that for me were very important. One was when I was finishing my master's degree, and one of the people doing my examination looked at me and said, well, yes, the work is fantastic, but what does it have to do with you being a Mexican woman? And I just thought to myself, what does it matter? You don't make up the man of a male artist. And what kind of work does one have to do to be simply an artist without being one of the boys? I don't want to be one of the boys. So I think this became a lot more more urgent for me once I became a mother, because issues of discrimination, to call it bluntly, became a lot more evident, and I'm passionate about it, so I'm very grateful to be invited to this panel.
Thank you so much. And can everybody hear me? It's all right in the room? I just want to check. Great. So that's a really interesting point that you just brought up, and I think I'd like to jump into the question of having to represent yourself in general. And this is sort of for all three of you, because I think you can answer this question from your various perspectives and professions. What about like essentialism and this kind of burden to represent female aesthetics, or as Julieta was talking about, identity aesthetics at that intersection? You know, on the one hand, there's this sense of soft art and textiles, and they're sort of taken like seriously as an art form. Of course, this is rapidly changing, and then on the other hand, we want to sort of do away with this idea that those forms of art have to ever be sort of tied to a particular gender or anything like that. So maybe you could start, Tanya, about speaking about how you've dealt with that when you're, at a fair and you have a short period of time to speak with a collector or a curator, how not to sort of be so reductive about these sort of topics.
Yeah, it's interesting because we were so kind to share a few questions before we started the panel, and that was one of them. And I really had to think about if I've ever addressed this, in the sense of, I want to pitch, my artist to a collector and how to avoid or not to, or say it out loud. Honestly, that has never been a topic of mine, because when I start to work with an artist and the artist starts to work with me, we chose to work together because they create that kind of work, and it could be that they're working with soft materials or not, or they're addressing certain issues or not. And for me, it's always about the work. So if I talk to a collector, curator, press, then it's always the center is always the work. And if that has something to do, with being or about something, of course we address it, but it always goes back to the artist and their practice. So I don't avoid it necessarily, but I also don't address it in particular. So it always has to come out of the art itself. But of course, when we work with artists, and I've experienced some waves in the past 10 years, some issues or some topics are then more, let's say, hip or want to be addressed more, for better or worse. And then of course some invitations come, and right away, if that invitation comes with integrity or not. So, and we always discuss with the artist, how does it feel like? Is it someone who just wants to be on the right side of history right now, and want to include that and that kind of person? Or is it something that the context is really interesting, the dialogue, of course we look at the artist list and then discuss, does it make sense, does it feel right? And then decide, the artist participates or not. So it's always about, checking in also with the artist, of course, does it feel right? Or is it also like, okay, it's the right moment, it's a fit, and I want to show that particular work and give that an audience and visibility. But you are very aware that the artist is also invited because it's an important position now to include. So it's always a discussion, but I would never pitch, or mention because the artist is from that background or this and that, if it doesn't include the artwork itself. Yeah.
And do you have anything to add to that, Lydia? Like thinking about it curatorially in particular?
Well, speaking about the medium, what I thought about while listening to you, maybe it was interesting, like historically to see because the Nordalina Kunstverein and the K also has a video collection, one of the biggest in Germany, and yeah. So it was interesting. We were talking with my colleagues that, like in the 60s and 70s, and also I was reading text by Barbara Kruger, just like. Now fresh because we opened the new facade work at the Nordalina Kunstverein with her, and it was like, I quote, it was, Barbara Kruger was organizing a show in the 80s in the kitchen in New York, and she invited many artists, male and female, as we speak, if we speak in binary, like I mean like male and female, but she was like, I quote, she was like, everyone was so excited, and there were so many women, and just like doing films and videos, and this is also like connected to the funding and to the finance moment of the accessibility of the medium, just like to do art and to start like, exactly, to start with the, not only, but there were a bunch of artists at that time doing pioneering video artists and so on, and this is also which is mirrored in the collection at the NDK, like which has works from 1960s until today, and the collection grows and so on, and so that was what I was talking about. And then another artist, of course, which was approaching directly the medium and this kind of gender marked mediums or materials, or also in sense of value and so on. It's of course like another very classic a big example, Jose Luis Trotter, which experimented with the floor and the thank you. Needlework. Thanks so much. And so playing with this moment of gender materials and so on, and being part of or how to access the predominantly male straight art market for context of art and art history.
Do you have anything you want to add to that, Julieta?
I guess I just would want to mention like subject matter and so on, right? I mean, just because this became a little bit like urgent to me once I became a mother, I wanted to experience like second layer of this kind of like disregard in terms of that state. I mean, it's interesting because you mentioned in the question that motherhood has always been seen as an unintellectual condition, let's say. Nonetheless, I mean, when you think about the subject matter, I have seen plenty of work of male artists that I address working with their children, and that work is always kind of very, like, seen very positively, right? And I also have seen, I mean, I think now, let's be fair, it has changed quite a bit, but historically I have seen work of women that decide to work with their children, and then you get the sense that people are like, well, she's going soft.
Interesting, yeah. But also, what about the fact that motherhood is sort of inherently like political as soon as you bring it into an art context? When we say as a woman, because it is something that is relatively taboo still as a subject matter.
I mean, for me, it's very interesting to see it from a political perspective, right? Both from like free labor and like the fact that you are there producing society for better or for worse, and also the kind of sense of inequality that it brings with the genders. It highlights, of course, the fact that women, even though we make up more than half of the world's population, continue to be seen as a minority for reasons that are incredibly hard to understand for me. So, I mean, I tend to always make it go towards a political arena. Yeah, that's just the nature from what I see.
Well, while we're on the topic of motherhood, I was in preparing for this panel, was rewatching this talk that you actually moderated in Basel in 2019 with Chus Martinez Copofusco and Nadine Zaidla, and about who are all mothers. And it was so interesting, of course, to bring it to Basel as this kind of like central node of the art world. But it was almost like within minutes of the conversation starting, you talked about money, because it came down to this. And so, to pivot away from aesthetics for a moment and talk about structure, can we speak about the financial burden of childbearing artists, and what sort of the biggest takeaways for you were, Julieta, from that talk, but also just conversations in general you've had with other parents?
I mean, well, it's, like one of like the unfortunate things is that obviously the prices of female artists are not comparable to the prices of male artists. I wish they were. I always have wanted to have an alter ego and, call myself, I don't know, and also to not be Mexican, to call myself, I don't know, Michael Douglas or something like that and see what happens to my prices. I mean, there is something that happens. The world is not very friendly to parents because most events happen between 6 to 8, and that is kid engagement time, so you have to always factor in, okay, am I going to bring the child and be, and be kind of like annoying to people, or am I going to have to hire a babysitter? Of course, you encounter people that really complain about the fact that you ask them to cover, to help you cover the costs. So it becomes a situation where you almost have to pay to play.
Yeah, and childcare is such an important thing that I think is not maybe appropriately addressed in funding or in gallery fees and considered appropriately. Like, how has that struggle been as an artist, or what have you, Lydia, what have you noticed as a curator, and how can one accommodate that better?
Thanks so much for bringing that topic up, which is super important, and it's also embarrassing to talk about motherhood as taboo. But unfortunately, 2021, it's really like the two ends, as I call it, like money and motherhood. It's really like the two big taboos in the world, maybe in general, but as we're in the art context, in the art world as well. And I'm very happy, sad, happy, but now in the last year, some artists were starting that like this any longer, and like having this burden, like to be the super great artist, like the great mom, to cook the meal, to be like everywhere, like this all-rounder caregiver, but to be that kind of underpaid at the same time. At the same time, there's maybe this fear or I don't know what boundaries, like to ask directly if the curators or the institution or whoever is providing the budget directly, hey, I need to take care of my child and I need to bring it with me to the installation of the show or whatever, or to this party or whatever. So how can you help me, or how can we deal with it? So we hear a lot of this, and one particular artist and myself, we were speaking about that 2 weeks ago, and we said this should be like part of the budget from the beginning on. It's not like a moment of discussion or at all to have to excuse yourself that you have a child, or to hide it, which also happens a lot to women, just like to never talk about this moment of being a mother, because it's like, maybe, I don't know, it's that internalized also moment, internalized male gaze or misogyny, internalized misogyny, because also women and men, again, in the binary moment, we both are not very supportive in the society at all. And there is this moment of, that's why money and motherhood, because I was reading also like about the gender care gap, which was now huge, and also because of the pandemic, it was like so visible, but it was there all the time. But just like COVID smashed or put the curtain away and made it more visible. And the other thing is the gender pay gap, and it's really circulating. The one is feeding the other moment. Yeah, I would like to give it further to you. Yeah. Or someone.
Yeah, I can just share my experiences because at least half of my artists I worked with my mothers and or became mothers while we worked together. They were not necessarily much mothers when we started, so I got a very good insight what the struggles are, or how also we talked about it, and I also know and it's very good and very good for me to see that everyone is dealing with it a bit differently. Also for different reasons, of course. Some have a really great partner, very supportive. Some are not, or separated along the way. Are single mothers now, and but it was for everyone. I have to say there was at least one conversation between us when they shared with me that they were pregnant, becoming a mother, that you could feel that they were afraid. They were afraid how would the relationship affect our relationship, or how would the situation affect our relationship, and also how would it be in terms of invitations for shows and all of that. And we talked very openly about it. I was trying to be as supportive as possible, and we also right away discussed if how much time she would like to take, or if we should plan already, even if it was like a year in advance, organize the next solo show to have kind of a vision, a perspective. So also for me to support her, no, we're still continuing our work, and I'm here, and we'll go through this together. Some of my artists chose deliberately, and they were very, to me, in private, vocally about it. They don't, because like one artist was really starting to get also institutional recognition, and she deliberately said, I'm not mentioning right now that I'm a mother, because I'm afraid that will affect my career right now. And once she started to really get traction, more visibility, and her career got more stable, then she was also very vocal about asking for artist fees, asking for support in childcare. Also knowing sometimes the budget was very small, she said, okay, I have to divide it between childcare and for production budget, for example. And we could see, the curators being really in shock, and she demanded for it. And it was not easy, but she continued to demand it, and she continued to demand it. And it was to a point where now she is in a position where she, is invited for a panel, let's say, and she says, because of her situation, I have to bring my 2 kids, and you have to organize childcare, otherwise they cannot come. And you can see it's really like people do it now, and the organizers do it, but it's like, wow, she's asking for it. You want to add something, Marietta?
Actually, this is something funny, right? I guess you may or may not know I have a particular model of the story, which is that I'm a single mom by choice, which means that there is no partner or no safety net there. So I have always chosen to. It was a very political decision as well as a personal decision. So it's always been very front and center. And one of the things that was very perplexing in terms of asking, which I have never been afraid to do, is that years ago I used to travel with my cat, which was kind of like an eccentricity, I know, but I could ask in residences, like what people I'm coming with my cat, and that was always fine. But when I have said to people I'm coming with my child, it's basically never fine. So I've had to cancel a number of things because of the child, but never because of the cat. And I mean, I just want in terms of what happens when attending a talk, I always ask that there is childcare on site, childcare available for anyone as a child that wants to bring the child. And what has happened in those talks is that all of a sudden, a whole set, because they can bring the child. So then I realized that there is an exclusion during that time. And I wish that was an extended practice in places and not something that is a concession that is made to me when I invite them to something.
Right, like it's not something you have to exceptionally ask for, because there's a burden, that's a labor form, to have to ask, and this is something that folds into all kinds of extra needs that any artist might have beyond motherhood in particular.
You become the typical artist, right? Like it's like, oh yeah, but then she's going to come and ask for that thing again. So that's
difficult, a word that's so often been ascribed to women artists, really. Like, the issue also folds into capitalism, of course, and it's kind of diagram of an artist's career that must continue to go up without pause. And I think that luckily perhaps the pandemic has taught us that we can take breaks and that things can continue and that things can foster in different ways. But I know in particular for just taking a break for a couple of years as a mother from an art career, it could be quite or feared as being detrimental or something. So anyway, maybe we could just speak a bit about that, the sort of constant need to sort of have a trajectory of a career and how tiring that can be, and also to kind of fight against these things. I mean, it's I guess what exclusion has been made better by the pandemic in the sense that there's digital tools now. So someone could be on maternity leave and still be at this talk, and I do hope that there are parents out there because there's no children in the room right now. But has the pandemic been easier or harder on you as a parent, Julieta? Was the ability to make it easier?
I mean, the pandemic has been brutal, really not. I basically was barely able to work because the combination of childcare and fear. It's like, of course, I'm in Berlin, if I die, my child's an orphan, and I could not get out of that mindset. And my studio is at home, so I was like, I can't resign myself to good boss. But I think, because it was like a shared situation, like I knew that everybody else was more or less going to the same thing. I had like, like existential fear of death, but not fear for my career, which is very different to what happened when I had my son. I mean, I sympathize very much with what Tanya was describing, because I programmed a solo show for 2 months after I had given birth, which meant, like I got up from my Wochenbeds, or however you call it, the bed rest, and started working within a week. And I know I did that because I was afraid that unless I made myself present, my career would take dive. And probably if I had not had that fear, I would not have chosen to start working within a week of having given birth.
Right. Yeah, pivoting a bit to the sort of aspects of women as they appear in collections, I wanted to ask you, Lydia, like, when you're collecting works for a public collection, how do you manage the sort of gender discount that sort of exists, where women artists are less expensive? Like, is it better to collect with quotas, or is it better to collect with, thinking about capital because of markets?
Talking now in context of the Artothek, like of the MK collection, I can say that each year when we do the acquisitions, but again, I'm there since 1 year, so I have just this insight from 2020 and 2021. But definitely there is this moment of the institution is aware of the statistics and of the numbers and how the whole collection looks at the moment since the 70s. And also, of course, trying to make a balance in gender equality at a later point. Also, of course, considering the intersectionality you said, like thinking of a race. We're in Germany, like the so-called migrant background and so on. So, who is visible and so on. So, talking about prices and quantity, it is also very important for us to do not just to go up with the numbers of, if we stay in the gender field of cis female artists, but then also to take a look how the numbers look like at the end. Like if we buy 13 works by female artists, which how much money are we gonna get out? And if we buy one work by a male artist, which has the same price and all. So sorry, to go back directly to your question, it is important. So we think about equality also in monetary sense. That's it. So
okay.
Yeah. Mm-hmm.
And do you have anything to add to that in terms of what you've experienced from the collector's side?
Actually, I mean, that's the great thing to grow and rise with young dialogue about the prices and where we want to head, and also to navigate. I mean, that's like all galleries' job, to navigate between demand, career, where you're at, and what kind of prices you ask for, and then slowly, hopefully rise, but not too fast, but not too, at the right point. And I think what was also helpful, also through the pandemic, because a lot of galleries and through the art fest are now very transparent with their prices, so you can compare better. Because it's not so much that you say, because I work with so many female artists, are 20% less expensive than male artists in some of the same career path. But also sometimes you don't know, and then you just ask for a certain price, and that's because that's what we agreed on. And now you can compare better and see like, oh, okay, they're asking for this and that, and actually I feel we could be on the same level, But I've never experienced like, I should, it's just a female artist. But I mean, that's also a general thing. Sometimes it's a game for some people who say, oh, that's quite expensive, and it doesn't, they would never say because it's a female artist, but in general, because you're a gallery, you're asking for a price, and that's already too much, so to start the conversation.
But that's such an interesting point about transparency. It also folds in with prices, of course, and when you can literally compare two numbers, but also with artist fees as well. I know, like, there was like a doc for journalists, and you could see, like, depending whether it was like a female or a male or a person of color, like the salaries were so vastly different. I think that also, would you agree that like are fees often agreed upon? How are fees agreed upon as an artist or as someone working at a public institution? And is there enough transparency in that regard? Either Julieta or Lydia, I pose the question to you.
Please continue.
I mean, I have seen. I would like to think that artistry can be horizontal, but it's not always the case. I think it has. I mean, it's a bit of a delicate thing because it has to do both with how well known the artist is, more so than the gender, but obviously it's gender underpins that because the chances of a female artist having the same career trajectory as a male artist are not the same. So, but I mean, like, I have been, I guess, very lucky in the sense that both in at EFOX we have flat fees, like everybody gets the same fee, regardless of gender or trajectory. That's makes things easier. With regards to myself, I feel that it's been fair. I don't complain much. I wish that there was childcare taken into consideration, but otherwise I don't fully complain.
Right. What kind of other, I think that it's really important to speak about structural issues. What kind of other structural issues do you think really need to be changed to make more progress in this particular issue? And maybe everyone can take a chance to sort of answer that, and I would then maybe open it up to questions from the audiences with us today.
One of the things I think I mentioned in the beginning is that the kind of image that's also perpetuated by ourselves as women is that there is room only for one woman in a particular situation, so that women often tend to love other women. So they kind of, because there is this need of being seen as one of the boys, if you are allowed to go anywhere, you have to be something like Ersatzmail, which is something that I would like to push against very much.
Yeah.
And to try to find modes of complicity. I mean, I love what you do, Tanya, in that sense, because they're like modes of complicity and solidarity and of working together and not against each other. That's something that it is structural, and it would be amazing to see it change somehow.
Right. Yeah. Like collectivity and more lateral structures. Do you have anything you wanted to add to that?
Well, I wanted to add or point out again because it just stayed in my head, the notion of a difficult woman, and also the wish for, we wish there would be more, someone would give us childcare or would offer us without asking, basically, is the question. And from my knowledge, you need to ask and you need to demand, because not so much it's just because we just said, there is such an internalized misogyny, and this is very structural. And I don't mean in a sense active, but very passive. Even myself, I learned so much through my artist, or my job, or the business that I do, and you come across or against structures that are completely male informed. Of course, they don't ask for childcare because they never had to. A lot of also women don't have children in the art world, so they don't know. So it's not so much about, I moved because otherwise, honestly, I would have not sustained the past 10 years from, even though I really like anger and it's also perpetuating a lot of change, which is important, but I said more as we need to educate, we need to inform, we need to ask for, and then we have to say, I need childcare, or the artist needs, because otherwise I cannot do that, or we need more time, or to develop my artwork and all of that, and just stick with it. Not in it could be pushy and angry and all of that, but more okay, I want to find the right collaborators for me, and not so much, fighting against the patriarchal structures, but go okay, we all don't want that, so let's find the allies. Where are they? And not, spend so much energy on, the old stuff, but, and use it to find the great people that are out there, but you have to look for it, you have to demand for it, and you have to, and to use your energy for that kind of change, yeah? And that's to me very important, and that's kind of how we learn, and also have to see, and that's how I saw the artist demanded for things, or we said, okay, it's not working like this anymore, we have to do it like this, or I cannot do the next solo show next year because it's too much, let's do it kind of for the year after, and have an open and honest conversation about it. And set boundaries, and that's just, to me, saying about difficult women, be difficult,
Yeah, so structural change, right? Yeah, I mean, we're in a moment, it's super exciting because like we have this clash of everything, and like now with COVID, you just see things more clearly, or even the people who wanted to ignore it, it's just so into the face and visible, which makes it's painful, but it's also, we all can, or I can learn a lot. I don't want to speak for everyone, sorry. But what I wanted to say is like in sense of labor and also working at institutions, I mean organized labor and so on, I think this, in Germany particularly here, the 40 hours week is like so passé. I mean, that doesn't work. I mean, for me as a non-mother, not mother, but also it's not healthy, and it's not productive, and it's not okay. Like I hear it from women, from men less, but also if we like openly speak about, it's just like yeah, yeah. And then the other moment is the transparency of the of the salaries. That's very, very important, because also in teams, I mean, of course we can say like on the surface it looks like that there are so many women in the art field, but of course there are. Like at the university I teach, there are like 90% or even more, the classes are full of women. The same things we hear about the arts academies, and it's also embarrassing to speak about, I mean, minorities, or it's not minorities, we're in the majority, like women, I speak from the perspective as cis women are in the majority, but it's but we are like marginalized. So, or even if you have like in one team 10 women who are working there, it looks, and one man who is the boss, it looks great for the optics, but at the end, like in the structure and in the root of all that, it's like so old-fashioned and so patriarchal and so toxic. And I think that kind of, I wish that we all together, and that's like solidarity and so on, and we also live in a time when all these words are such a buzzwords that every time when I take it in my mouth, I feel like, what am I talking about? But like, instead of talking about change, it's just like, let's do it healthy and pro-life. I mean, and we all want to be, I hope, for like kind of to live good together. And what,
Yeah, I mean, the patriarchy is bad for everyone,
Yeah,
men included,
yeah.
as we were speaking about before. I'll maybe open it up to the room. Is there anyone who wants to ask a question to the panel today? Or share a comment? Yeah, please.
Question. Hi, good evening. My name is Christine Leconte. I have a question to you in particular. In your library of art, do you know the split between artwork by male and female artists? If you know the number?
I'll just repeat it.
And the split of what is being borrowed by people. If you have numbers on that.
So the question was about the division between male and female artists in the collection, but also in terms of interest in what people are borrowing from the collection.
Oh, thanks so much for the interesting question and reminding me. I extra did this research for the talk, like with the numbers, because I'm like not a number person, but okay, it's important. I'm more like stories and life share stories. So, however, the numbers in the architects look like, I thought in the beginning, or thinking in general of collection, that it would be worse, to be honest. But now it looks like 40-60%, like we have 60% male artists. I mean in the artistic, that's like the collection with paintings, photographs, and so on. The video forum looks better in terms of quota. That's why I also in the beginning mentioned like the medium. I don't know, maybe it's connected to this. But yeah, so to repeat, like 40, let's say 40% women, 60% men, and we work toward this, like yeah, to keep the balance. What we're still not very good on and aware as an institution, and we have our conversations, of course, is like to open to other representatives. I mean, we now spoke and we're focused on gender, but of course on race, in general, like people of color, migrant background, transgender, non-binary, and so on. So it's still a lot, tons of work to do, but the good moment is like to shaping the awareness, and the other thing is like the positive changes to see, like in the last 15 years, I mean, since also Marius Babias is the director of the Neue Berliner Kunstverein, and he also very much like focuses on this, and you can see how like these statistics change. Because of course, like for me, it was super interesting to see like the 70s and the 80s and the 90s. It's just like, oh, like of course there are great artworks in there, but from our perspective, it's really like, yeah. And the other thing is what people go, yeah, it's different. I mean, I love that open moment and just like in sense of taste, which is also like all the no-goes for the professional art world to talk about art. You can hear in the artothèque, which is very often like, oh, this fits to my wall or whatever, and I allow myself to say it out loud here because I think. And now, like during COVID, we saw that as the people stayed at home, like the privileged one having homes, and renovated a lot and so on. So they were like super happy to come back to us after the lockdown, so to borrow new artworks. Of course, names like Picasso. I have to say we have one Picasso drawing that is like still for excuse me. It's still like a not bestseller because we don't sell it, but like a star. But it depends, and there are like also it depends on the generation and on the But we have people from all walks of life, and it's very exciting. And there are some people who like take a look. Is that like on the female artists and so on? But many just the work itself is important. I would say, and so in everyday's work. Thank you.
Yeah.
I just wanted to ask, in my experience, women give each other opportunities, and I wanted to ask the panel what hope there is in the future, in the near future, for female collectors, more female collectors. If
Yes.
there's a tendency, it's a growing tendency or not?
Yeah, that's a really interesting question about how females often typically support each other, and of course within that paradigm, the question is about collectors. Are there more female collectors now, and how can that grow?
Yes, absolutely, and also there are younger female collectors. I think there's also a change in wealth, and also how younger women make money and accumulate money, and also have more confidence in buying art. And from my perspective, I really feel that there's also a different notion how women and men buy. Not so much. Of course, there can be much more. They can buy more, but it's also the sensitivity is different. Like there are some, of my experience, sometimes men collect, or some really, not everyone, also like a status, fast, I'll take it, like this, I like it, I just buy it. And the women, in my experience, they are more cautious, but almost like they really fall in love over a period, with a bit of time, and then really get the courage and then go for it, So of course there are some who are very experienced and are quicker in their decisions, but that's kind of my experience. So it's actually a great pleasure always to that an artwork finds a home with a female collector, and when this transaction happens. But I really feel that there's going to be a major shift in the next 10 years or so. Also.
Yeah, the Art Basel report actually said that women's wealth was going to grow faster than anything else in the 2020s. That it was really going to be a defining decade for women's wealth. Wealth being its own kind of vexed issue, but nevertheless. Are there any other questions? Yes, please.
I was very inspired by Tanya, this discussion, the dialogue that you have with your artists in general, and I guess one question is just if that sort of is common amongst galleries, because I felt that when you also talk about anger, that somehow going from anger to this productive demand, often you need a conversation with another person, to get out of your anger into a reasonable demand, or this feeling that you can demand something. Just a conversation with a friend, or especially if it's in a business context with your gallerist, that can be very helpful. And then I was just curious if you've come into the one theme we didn't then talk about was this harassment that sometimes happens, and that I could very much see how having a gallerist dialogue there could be very helpful. And I'm just curious, some more comments about that.
Do you mean what the artists sometimes experience, or me as a gallerist, or in our context, or what do you mean? What kind of
within harassment, I guess I had very specifically in mind that what I have experienced, as an artist without a gallerist, is that people can get closer than I would like because they pretend interest in work, or maybe even purchase work. But there's and then I think, okay, great, if I could deflect this conversation to a business partner. I would be out of the situation in 5 minutes. Like, yeah, this would be so refreshing.
Yes, actually, that's very helpful because when we try to when we're at the stage where an interest is passed through the gallery, it's also a filter, and it's very helpful. And I mean, by now, I want to say with my experience, I can also see what kind of, where that intention is, and then also either the conversation stays with me or, between the collector and myself. And I would only, if I feel very comfortable, send the collector to the art studio and, have even that conversation or that one-on-one contact. And of course, that's very helpful if you have a gallery as a filter, or have, if you don't have that, maybe a friend be with you. And I would always advise, when you have a hint of an uncertainty or a weird feeling in your stomach, go with it. Mm-hmm. It's mostly it's true, and or there is something to it. Doesn't mean that something happens, but there is a reason why you don't feel comfortable. And then I would always ask someone to join in, or even say no if it's really like that. And also, this is really something for younger artists, and it's really go with your gut. And if it doesn't feel right, any sort of invitation from anyone, gallerist through collector or whatever, don't do it or say no. It's totally fine. And I feel the more you're sharp in this, also the good people will come and the good collaborations will come. But this is the very tricky part, especially in the beginning, because young artists, any sort of attention, they think like, oh, I have to take it. And so, of course, it's a lot better when you have a partner on your side, or experienced artist friend who can then say, it's good to say no.
Are there any more questions? Or Julieta, did you want to add anything to that since we're speaking about artist experiences there?
No, I think Daniel summarized it quite well.
Well, thank you so much, everyone, to the panelists particularly, but also to everyone who came today. It's so nice to see women and men and various people like in here. So thank you so much, and let's continue this conversation outside, perhaps.
Thank you so much. Thank you.